My name is Isabelle McConville, and I am a bookseller and producer here at Barnes& and Noble. And I am so thrilled to say that I am here with one of my favorite authors, the author of the Poppy War trilogy, Babel, Yellowface, and now Katabasis. R.F. Kuang, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, can we please start with you setting up the story of your new book for us?
So, Katabasis is the story of two graduate students in analytic magic who journey to hell to rescue the soul of their advisor who died in a freak magical accident so that he can come back to life and write them recommendation letters so that they can get jobs in the very competitive market for tenure track magic academia postings. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I am in the end stages of a PhD myself and about to go on the job market. I'm not anxious at all.
I'm so glad you gave us that preface there. Um, it's such a wild premise, this book. I just wonder if you can pinpoint the moment when you knew you wanted to write this book, because I know you were working on it at the same time, I think it's Yellowface.
I actually write all of my books one at a time. I'm really
Ah,
bad at multitasking, so I always have like an idea cooking in the back burner, but it really is just one manuscript at a time. So Yellowface was done and revised and sent in, and then I got the idea for Catabasis, and here we are now.
I gotcha. Okay. So can you pinpoint the moment when you knew you wanted to write this book and really like how the idea for it just came to you and you formed that?
Well, after I finished writing Babel, I knew I wanted to at least do a dark academia duology, maybe a trilogy, and it wouldn't be, a classic trilogy with the same characters in the same world, but all of these books would tackle different aspects of academia from different angles. So after I'd done Babel, which is this like big socio-historical approach that critiques really the foundations of universities and colleges from the 1800s onward. Catabasis looks more at the intensely interpersonal, psychological aspect of academia. What does being a PhD student do to you? Why are so many PhD students so depressed? What are the kind of mind games that go on within a department? And what is it about this quest for knowledge that makes people deranged in startlingly similar ways? So obviously, I had just started my PhD. I was a year or two in. I think I started writing Katabasis in earnest during the second year of my PhD. So I was very much steeped in that environment, and I wanted to do something fun that responded to it.
I know you said you started off with these questions. First, did you find any solutions to those problems in your head while writing this book? And also, did this book kind of give you any solace?
Yes and no. I don't write to find answers. I actually find it very condescending or paternalistic when an author offers a worldview and says this is the only right approach to any of these questions. It kind of betrays the complexity of the question. So all I ever try to do in my novels is to work at a thorny knot of issues and invite readers to be curious with me. So I was curious about a lot of things. I was curious about, is it even worth it getting the PhD? I'm curious about student teacher relationships. What is the nature of those obligations? What does the teacher owe to his students? What do students owe to their teachers? What are all the ways in which it can go wrong? And I was interested in questions of the body. I was wondering, is the mind really all that separate from the body? Is the body this useless carcass, this piece of baggage that we could discard with the mind be freer without the body? Or is the body important to our flourishing and our thinking in a way that shouldn't be overlooked? So I really went down a deep dive of the most basic, I think, existential questions of what it means to be alive and live a good life. And I did find a lot of solace when I did that because some of the backstory to my writing Catabasis is this book is very personal for me. During the first semester of my PhD, my then boyfriend, who is now my husband, he was hospitalized multiple times for what was finally diagnosed as a chronic illness that we didn't know he had. So a lot of the character Peter's story comes from his story. And it was
Wow.
just such a devastating semester for both of us. I think we'd never struggled like that before. I was freaked out and crying and depressed all the time, and he was very, very sick. So what started as this kind of like fun, lighthearted satire of academia became this inquiry into what does it feel like when you've hit rock bottom, when you really don't want to keep living, and what does it take to climb out of there? Where do you find the value in living again? And I do think I found an answer for myself, and I hope the book is solace for people who are constantly grappling with that same question themselves.
Absolutely. That's honestly what I was going to say too, is that I love how you started with these questions to yourself, because I think for a lot of people, have those same questions in even a different way. Like, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have success? What does it mean to be ambitious? But it's nice when authors take those same questions and put it into book form so that we can explore those feelings without feeling like we are putting ourselves under the microscope. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm the one putting myself in all my worst nightmares and all my loveliest fantasies under a microscope.
And you also start this book off with a quote from Plato. I'm not going to read it because I will butcher it, and it's a beautiful quote. But could you please tell me about picking that and how you knew you wanted it to start your story?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in this Platonic dialogue called the Phaedo, which is about Socrates, specifically the death of Socrates. And it's a conversation that Socrates is having with his friends after he has been sentenced to suicide, basically. He's given hemlock to drink. And all of his friends are reasonably so upset. They're like, Socrates, don't drink that. We'll help you escape. Or, we can find some other solution, but you really don't have to die. And Socrates has really resigned himself to death, and he's ready to step into the next life. So something he says by way of comfort is, oh, well, doing dying is just freeing the mind from the body for Socrates and Plato, who's speaking to the puppet of Socrates in this dialogue. The body is really the source of all of our ills and our malice. It's this carcass that has appetites and that is has incontinent urges. And I don't mean incontinence in the sense that you can't hold it in when you have to urinate, but rather this weakness of will, of acting on like things you want too much, rather than the things that are right and just. And in this dialogue, Plato offers the view that, oh, if we could just get rid of that, then the mind would be this free floating thing that can just do philosophy, and that brings you to the gods. So dying is the best thing you can do to get closer to the gods. And that's, I think, a really optimistic perspective for anybody who's ever been at war with their own body. And people can be at war with their bodies for all sorts of reasons. For instance, eating disorders. The One of the protagonists, Alice, she's anorexic, and she has this condition where it's not out of vanity or beauty standard, but she's really tired of being embodied, and she kind of wishes that she would just disappear or whittle down into nothing so that she could be pure mind. On the other hand, Peter, who has this chronic illness, and lots of people who have autoimmune disorders have written about how it feels like your body is betraying you, how you don't recognize your own body. Your body is attacking itself all the time. So that mind body duality is very attractive there. So you can see why this perspective would be so seductive. But I won't spoil the book. But as the story goes on, we shift away from that Platonic perspective to a more Aristotelian perspective on the relationship between the mind, the soul, and the body, and that's where we end up, and that's where I found my solace.
That's amazing. And we really see that evolution in Alice's character. She quickly became one of my new, just favorite literary characters. I saw so much of, my own fears and my own desires within her. And she's truly one of my favorite literary characters. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about finding her voice and really creating her as a character and knowing when you had Alice Law as we see her in the book.
Alice is just such a big mess of contradictions. And I think really her most defining trait is that she's absolutely delusional. And I don't mean delusional in the sense that she just has visions that come out of nowhere, although because of one condition that she has like a mental disability, which is a spoiler that is an important plot point later. So she is at war with her own mind because of that. But even before this was inflicted on her, she was getting really practiced at telling herself a series of lies, what I call her catechisms or her staircase, a series of beliefs that she has to cling to, otherwise, she can't make it in the world that she's chosen for herself. So, one of her beliefs is that academia is a meritocracy. Another belief is that sexism won't affect her. Another belief is that she just has to focus on doing the best possible research and nothing else will get in the way. And all of these beliefs come crumbling down as she is at Cambridge and her advisor is behaving like a monster towards her. But she has no ability to cope with this, in part because I very deliberately set this novel in the mid 80s, and this is really the heyday of Reaganism and Thatcherism and neoliberalism, this really belief in individual autonomy and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and a total denial about the existence of structural inequality. And as a result, a kind of collapse of systems of solidarity. So Alice doesn't have any of these things. She's already rejected the other women around her because she doesn't want to be seen as weak. She doesn't want to be seen as an annoying feminist. So when bad things happen to her, she really has no ability to cope except for to tunnel further into her delusions. So that's my Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Instead of Alice discovering Wonderland, the Wonderland is this web of illusions that she's constructed for herself that she's really struggling to find her way out of.
And something that I noticed about revisiting Babel in my preparation for this interview and reading Katabasis is that we have this found family cohort in Babel where it's this tight knit relationship between your main characters. And we kind of see the opposite of that in Katabasis, where Alice and Peter barely have each other as it is. And it's more of the experience of academia while isolated. Can you tell me a little bit about that and if you meant to do, um, I guess, the opposite with that experience in academia in this book?
Oh, that's absolutely right. Babel is a story about friendship, and it's about four and then three people really finding one another and clinging to each other, like a lifeboat. But in Catabasis, Alice and Peter could be each other's support systems, and there's a moment in which they really were, and there's this flashback that describes their friendship, which I really loved writing because I've had friendships like that too, and they really were one another's person. But because they are so, it's actually a very classic rom com or romance problem, right? Two people who are really meant to be together, who are longing to be together, are kept apart by essentially a problem of communication. And I've taken this problem of communication one step further because I'm trying to examine this abyss that can open up between people and ask what would it take to really know somebody and to forgive somebody, and how can you get in the head of somebody who is constantly inventing or reinventing themselves until they seem like an utter stranger to you. So it's such a classic romance trope, but that's essentially what's going on here. They could be each other's best found family and best support system, but they both believe things about the other and about themselves that just aren't true. And it takes a heart to heart, face to face confrontation, on the brink when things are almost too late in order to reverse this. So that's actually not a unique aspect of this plot. It's the oldest romance trope in the book.
I love that you brought up the romantic aspect of this book because that's really what I was so excited to talk to you about too, is how did you know you wanted to write essentially a romance and have a love story as kind of the driving force of this book? Like when did you really know that's what you wanted to do with it?
Yeah, I hesitate to call it romance because
Yeah.
romance means such like specific things
Yes.
genre-wise, and people have lots of expectations for things that should happen in romance, and almost none of those things happen in this book. So I like to call it romantic, and I do
Yeah.
think it's a love story. But I've been wanting to write about characters falling in love for a long time, and elements of that have been present in all of my books. I really love examining this intense interpersonal dynamic between two people. Typically, I do it through rivalries, like between Rin and Nudge and the popular trilogy, between
Right.
June and Athena and Yellowface. But I love exploring like all different types of closeness, romantic or not. So I've always been doing that. But for Katabasis, really the honest answer is I got married, and I went through a really difficult patch of our lives with my now husband, and we really weathered a storm, and that had me contemplating, what does it mean to sacrifice everything for someone? What does it mean to really care for somebody? What does it mean to expose your soul and bare yourself to somebody that you know you might lose? And these are big square questions that anybody who's ever loved anybody has thought about them. So naturally that became Katabasis.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all think about those things, but we leave it to you to write the books, and I'm so glad that you do. I'd also love to talk about something that I came across in my research while getting ready for this interview. I came across a great piece you did for Time Magazine on Olivia Rodrigo and the impossible pressure to stay a prodigy. In it, you mentioned Alice from Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? And so that, of course, led me to jump down my own rabbit hole. I revisited that book as well before this. And so I wonder if at all you can tell me if that inspired anything about your Alice and how that piece may have shown up in this book at all.
Oh, I I love Sally Rooney's work. I've always been a big fan of Normal People, but Beautiful World, Where Are You is my favorite novel of hers because I think it deals so well with mental illness, and I think it is the most accurate, not accurate, but true feeling representation of what it feels like to be at the top of your game and isolated because of that, and really the kind of crippling like fear and anxiety that being famous can give you. So I adore that novel. I like the name Alice. I've always loved it because of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And I think there's just something kind of brittle about it, something fragile. It's Alice to me is a very special girl who's just, I think, thin skinned and fragile in a lot of ways. You see that in Rooney's Alice, and you see that in my Alice
Hmm.
as well. So, yeah, those are where I would draw the lines. Beyond that, I think our Alices are actually quite dissimilar. Her Alice is a very successful novelist, and my Alice is a middlingly successful PhD student.
Right, yeah. I love that piece because the way that you talk about just ambition and success and how the pressures of being a prodigy, I think we see that a lot in your Alice as well, with how she grapples with where she is. Obviously, she doesn't have that success that she wants, but she's on that path to getting it. Um, and it doesn't surprise me that you're a Sally Rooney fan. I'm a huge Sally Rooney fan because I think that those interpersonal dynamics that she writes so well, I can see between Alice and Peter for sure.
Yeah, gosh, I just really love her work.
Me too. Me too. And I know you said that a lot of Peter's character came from the real life experiences that you and your husband have dealt with. I wonder if there's anything else about his character that you can tell me, like how you fleshed him out and how you really formed him and his voice?
Well, I was thinking about the most annoying possible person to have as a rival in a department. And so Peter is a big grab bag of all the jokes we make in academia about, the person you wouldn't want to compete with if you were up for the same job. So, first of all, he's the child of two academics. And being the child of professors, I think I read a statistic somewhere, it just makes you way, way more likely to get tenure than any other factor.
He's a
Maybe
nepo
that's made
baby.
up, but it seems right to me. Yeah. Well, he talks the talk. He knows this world. He knows everybody socially. Anybody reading his job file has probably been at his parents' home for a dinner party, and he knows what people read. He knows how people talk, and that's an enormous advantage when you get into a PhD program. I always felt out of my depth. My dad did a PhD in electrical engineering, and that's a world apart. I'm sitting here with all these humanities people being like, "You read who? Like, what authors in vogue right now?" And it takes a while to like learn the language of this crazy world that you've been thrust into. So Peter has that. He's also possessed of an like a near photographic memory, which I just find infuriating. I know a lot of people, really people in like STEM fields who have that like prodigious memory where they can recite like hundreds of digits of pi, or their brains are just functioning on a level that mine never could. And I'm intensely jealous of that. So I put that in Peter. And so I wanted somebody who on the outside seems like everything comes easy to him. He has the connections, he has the social skills, he has the memory, he never has to study. And then I wanted to examine on the flip side, like what might be the intent behind this outward appearance or perception, and what might he be hiding. And so a core of Peter's personality is that he wants everybody else to think that things come easy to him because he loves this illusion of genius. He loves everybody thinking of him as a genius because then they're not thinking of him as a sick person, which is the baggage that he dealt with throughout his childhood. So even though, like, by all external markers, I mean, he's white, he's male, he's successful, he's adored by everybody in the department, he's dealing with his own demons. And that just goes to show that you never know what somebody is struggling with, and you shouldn't make assumptions about what people have had to overcome and what they've had to fight through to get to where they are.
Absolutely. And he really keeps Alice on her toes, which is really fun to read. I just love their dynamics.
Yeah, he's a sweetie pie. They're like the black cat. I recently learned about this, the black cat golden retriever dynamic. That's very much them. And I think in my marriage as well, I'm like the prickly black cat, and my husband is the golden retriever.
Oh, I love that. It's so funny to me that you just learned about that because they are the perfect example of that trope.
They're not very online, so everything reaches me like a year late.
And going back to Alice for a minute, one of my, I guess I would say one of my favorite parts of this book is really at the midway point when Alice and Peter come across a deity and they're kind of at a crossroads. And they basically, without spoiling anything, they have to make a decision. And we see Alice struggle with her decision to the point where the way that you wrote that scene genuinely brought me to tears because I think that's when I've learned, I finally felt like I understood Alice. Just seeing her make the choice that she makes at that crossroads. I think that you wrote it so beautifully, and you can really see the way that she unravels and tries so hard to keep herself together. Can you tell me a little bit about writing that?
It's really difficult to describe that scene without giving spoilers. I'll say two things. I
Mhm.
I love the dialogue that Alice and Peter have before they make that choice where they play that game, because well, they get to debate what love is, and if it's a simple concept that you can
Hmm.
um, kind of understand in theory and then act according to, or if it's something more mysterious and passionate and indescribable. So I think that exchange just like showcases their different personalities so well, and I really enjoyed writing that. But yeah, when Alice makes her pivotal decision, it's tough because she's not a ruthless person, and she's not the kind of person who could sacrifice somebody else for her goals. But she's also paranoid at this point, and
Yeah.
she's scared of what other people will do to her because it's been happening to her already. Um, and I recently watched 2001: A Space Odyssey in theaters.
Oh my gosh.
So this is like such a silly comparison, but it's the best one I can think of right now. When Hal, the supercomputer, starts acting all funny, it's I think it's in the next film actually that they explain, oh, it's because he couldn't handle the contradictions, and his mind goes into this paranoid spiral. And this book is really about contradictions and systems breaking down because they can't handle the contradictions. So, in that moment for Alice, the web of lies that she's been telling herself, she finally can't sustain the weight of that contradiction, and she breaks down, and she kind of makes like a non-choice that spills into an unwilling choice. And so even in that moment she doesn't even have full agency because she's just not in control of her mind anymore, and that is a
Hmm.
very, very scary place to be.
That's really where I truly felt like I understood her character and I understood her insecurities and the way that she tells herself lies. Like you said, how she kind of lives in this very specific kind of delusion. And I just loved how you wrote it too. It felt like a masterclass in tension because, I mean, it's like the cliche of you're showing and not telling. And I love that scene.
I'm so glad it worked for you.
It really did. And so we talked a little bit about this theme of ambition and what success really means, but I wonder if we can dig into it a little bit more because one of my favorite lines from this book, and I read it aloud to my boyfriend again, this line last night because it's just one of my favorites from the book. Alice says of having to sacrifice half of their lifespans to go to hell. Um, would she rather graduate, produce brilliant research, and go out in a blaze of glory? Or would she rather live out her natural lifespan, gray haired and drooling, fading into irrelevance, consumed by regret, had not Achilles chosen to die in battle? I love that line. Can you tell me more about writing that and what that really tells us about who Alice is?
Yeah, I think those are easy sentiments when you're young.
Yeah.
um, I and when old age just seems scary, but I think as I get older, not even that old, I'm not 30 yet. I think, being gray-haired and living in irrelevance doesn't sound so bad. It sounds like a nice calming reward. But I think when you're young and ambitious and all you can think about is the degree ahead of you or the shiny prize ahead of you, it's so easy to be careless with your life and throw everything out. And this is classic Alice, at least at the start of the novel. She'll sacrifice anything and everything because all she wants to do is do good scholarship, and she's just totally blind to the other questions of what it might mean to live a good life. And I like to think she starts discovering that as she goes on her journey through hell.
And so, moving on, like you did in Babel, you create such an intricate magic system in this book, complete with magic chalk and mind bending paradoxes, all rooted in logic. Can you tell me about how you created that system?
Oh my gosh, this magic system was so fun. I have been interested in logic for a long time, but the difference between Katabasis and the other books that I've written is that everything else was based in my own research and my own academic specialty. So I was studying history and writing a dissertation in wartime history when I wrote the popular trilogy, and then when I wrote Babel, I was doing translation and I was studying at Oxford. And Of course, when I wrote Yellowface, I know, well, not studying the publishing industry, but I know way too much about it. But I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a logician, and I'm not a linguist. So I had to turn to my husband, who is a philosopher, and to other people in his department who are logicians to teach me everything about this field that is becoming the magic. And that was just tons of fun. We actually hosted a party at our apartment called the Paradox Party, where everybody came over and they had to present a paradox and explain the possible magical implications of it. And because we are who we are, we had a big whiteboard in the living room because I think it's not a good party unless somebody has a magic marker and is drawing diagrams on a whiteboard. In the place where we currently live, we don't have the wall space for the whiteboard, and I kind of think we should get like a big rollout whiteboard. The whiteboard lives in my husband's office, so I'm grumpy about that. Anyways, so people only got fed after they gave me a good paradox. So many of the magic spells that you'll read in Katabasis were taught to me by an MIT graduate student.
That's so funny. Oh, it's not a real party until the whiteboard's brought out.
No, people made handouts. It was wonderful.
That's so funny. Um, I also want to talk a little bit about how you created your own version of hell and what you really looked toward to form that version. And so I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how you made that decision and what you looked toward, whether it was old books or articles or movies that helped you kind of form your own version of hell.
Well, importantly, it's not everybody's hell that is a college campus. It is
Hmm.
just these two people's version of hell, and Professor Grimes' hell that is a campus. Because here I did take a lot of inspiration from ancient mythology, where all the images of the afterlife just look like mirror images of the life that the deceased was already living. We have a lot of bureaucratic structures in courts that just look like ancient Chinese courtrooms, for example. And of course, we have ancient Egyptian fantasies or beliefs that hell would just be like waking up in your own palace with your pets and your servants and everything that you're used to. So, really fascinated by, I don't think it's the narrowness of the imagination, but rather a conviction that the afterlife like has all the same structures and the same infrastructure as the life you already were living. I was wondering, what might possibly be a reason for that. And one argument is that the punishments of hell, or its setup would only make sense to you. You would only learn your ethical lesson if it's grounded in an environment that you're familiar with it. I describe it as your moral universe. And there's a kind of cheeky line where Alice and Peter think, well, Professor Grimes's moral universe didn't extend beyond the bounds of the university. He just didn't think about anybody else outside of a campus. So that's why they're restricted to a campus. It's because that's the life they know, and those are the stakes that are intelligible to them. But if they were any other person working in any other profession, then hell would look entirely different.
Also, in anticipation of the book's release, some readers have been revisiting some old works like Dante's Inferno and creating their own required reading list before they jump into Catabasis. I wonder if you kind of have your own required reading list for readers of anything that would help them understand this version of hell you've created, or also just supplemental, like dark academia books that you would put on your required reading list.
Yeah. Oh, I did see some of those lists going around and I thought it was so fun. I think it's such a beautiful thing when especially young women are sharing their love of classics on book talk. I'm like, wow, this is what book talk was for. So I thought that
Yeah.
was so sweet. All power to them. That's so, so cool. Um, I do not think of anything as a required reading list because I think the book does make sense if you haven't had exposure to anything that it's referencing. But I hope it does
Mhm.
make people really curious about all the books that it references and that they go read them afterwards or before, whatever order you feel like. But obviously, a very influential text is Dante's The Inferno, which is just super fun on its own. It's not as the register is not so noble as I think people imagine it is. It's actually an incredibly petty text. And it's just Dante taking pot shots at everybody who he doesn't like. And it's like a running list of like gossip of his political milieu. So Inferno's tons of fun. But other texts that might not be as obvious inspirations until you've read the book are T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which is a poem that's quoted often. There is a line that gave me shivers, so I just put it right in the book as a quote by Eliot. And it's the line, I will show you fear in a handful of dust. And Alice and Peter think this when they're ruminating on some adversaries that they've encountered in the desert scape of hell. So I love The Wasteland. Obviously, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I think A, for the whimsical tone, but B, because what Lewis Carroll is doing with his kind of fantastical representation of mathematical and logical elements are exactly the same. It's the same structure of exposition that I'm trying to do. So I just think his writing style is so much fun. And then I'll say one more, Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, and her
Oh,
poetry, because I mean, if you want a young woman's writing that deals with mental illness and feeling like you've been betrayed by your own mind, but also being just like burningly ambitious, Sylvia Plath is the goddess of all of that. So Alice's character takes much inspiration from Sylvia, and I think so do I, just in my everyday life.
I can see that now that you've said it. I can definitely see the bell jar in this book. I love that comparison so much. I also saw that this book has been comped to Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, and I love that
Yeah.
book. I just what she does with space and time in that book and just the pacing of it. I love it.
And attitudes of academic arrogance. There is this
Mhm.
really wonderful passage in Piranesi where the antagonist, I'm forgetting his name. I think Piranesi just knows him as the other. He says, "Well, we've got to master the secrets of the universe so that we can control other people with our minds." And Piranesi's like, "But why would you want to do that? Like, why isn't it enough just to like know things?" And I think, yeah, it's just such a nice attitude to take towards knowledge as possession and control versus knowledge for the sake of knowledge.
Yes, and I'd love to talk a little bit about craft and structure before I let you go. First, did you write this in the order that we read it in? And second, have you noticed anything about your writing that's changed from your earliest work to now if you look back on the years?
I never write anything in order. That's not how my brain works. I get really bored if I try to think chronologically. So I just write scenes that I think are fun, and then I figure out how to stitch them together into a plot that makes sense after they're already on the page. I think my writing style has changed enormously since I started writing. I think every book sounds and feels like is written by a completely different person. And in a way, that's true because I am evolving and becoming a different person. I have different ambitions, I have different preoccupations and priorities. And I think I'm growing by leaps and bounds just as a prose stylist as I keep reading and discovering ways of fitting words together to best get my message across. So I try really deliberately to sound like a completely different author when I tackle a new project. So I think, it's really hard to draw a line between anything in the popular trilogy and this book. And I like it this way because I like to kind of be a genre chameleon and constantly reinvent myself with each new project.
And I know that we love reading it over here as well whenever you do that. And I know you said that you always have something bubbling beneath the surface. Is there anything you want to talk about today that might be coming next, or are you full speed ahead on your PhD right now?
I am working very hard on my dissertation, but I have another piece of literary fiction coming out next September, I think. It's called Taipei Story. It'll be my seventh novel. Wow. And
Wow.
it is about a college freshman on a study abroad program in Taipei over a summer when her grandfather passes away. So it revisits a lot of the same themes as Babel, grief and language and translation, and ask the question of what does it mean to become a person in a second language, a language that you're not good at. And the stylistic influences on that book are Patricia Lockwood and Sally Rooney. So I'm really, really excited to bring that one out. It's so totally different from anything else I've written, but I'm really proud of it.
I'm so excited to read that, and I know all of our listeners just jumped for joy after hearing that too. So I can't wait for it. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here and for talking to our listeners on Port Over.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.